The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And just before I give my speech on this very important topic, I would just want to quickly comment on the horrific incident we faced in southern Manitoba over the weekend with the tragic loss of life of 2 young women and 3 children. You know, as a father, it's tough to fathom the loss of a child and the impacts it has on that family's loved ones, friends, and everyone in their lives, and frankly, the broader community. So my heart goes out to Carmen and the surrounding area, the friends and families and loved ones of the victims of this horrific incident. It's devastating news for a small community like that where folks know their neighbors and look out for each other. So I pray for strength during a dark and incredibly difficult time for our community. But to the issue at hand, Madam Speaker, we are more than a month away from this Liberal government implementing medical assistance in dying for those who suffer from a mental illness. I believe it's heartless, it's reckless, and it's immoral. Every Canadian has worth, and I, for one, will never give up on those who need help. Never have I seen a government mismanage an issue as critical as this. And while it may be unpleasant for my Liberal colleagues to hear, I believe they must be held to account. And due to the incredibly serious nature of this issue, there is a lot to be answered for. How could this Prime Minister let this happen, let it get to this point? How could the government be so irresponsible and negligent? From day one, our Conservative team in Parliament has been sounding the alarm bell, but we were ignored. Now we find ourselves in an emergency. I believe it's ludicrous that it took the outcry of countless medical professionals to get the Liberals to reverse course on this matter. Witness after witness testified to the Special Joint Committee on MAID about the dangers of pressing ahead with this plan. And why did the Prime Minister accept the last-minute amendment put forward by the Senate that dramatically changed the legislative framework for MAID? There was no parliamentary study, there's no consultation with experts or affected groups, and no evidence that MAID for mental illness could be implemented safely and appropriately. And when the Liberals' original Bill C7 was put before MPs, at no time did it contain any language about creating a pathway for MAID for those with mental illnesses. In fact, it explicitly ruled it out in its entirety. The original proposed amendment to the Criminal Code specified that, quote, persons whose sole underlying medical condition is a mental illness are not eligible for medical assistance in dying. The then Minister of Justice said, quote, there is no consensus amongst experts on whether and how to proceed with MAID on the basis of mental illness alone, end quote. The minister then did a 180 and became a proponent of this disastrous course. And due to his actions and the Prime Minister's rubber stamping of those Senate amendments, we are where we are today. And this is now the second time that the Liberals have had to delay the implementation of their reckless legislation. There will never be a consensus from mental health experts that the government should implement MAID for those who are suffering from mental illness. And if the Liberals won't listen to me, I implore them to listen to their own expert panel on MAID and mental illness, when they said it's implausible to determine whether a mental disorder is incurable. The report said, and I quote, there is limited knowledge about the long-term prognosis for many conditions, and it is difficult, if not impossible, for clinicians to make accurate predictions about the future of an individual patient. That was echoed by the heads of psychiatry departments of all 17 medical schools, who called on the Liberals to stop this plan from being implemented on March 17th. Now, I completely agree with these experts, but not only should we pause this law from being implemented, we need to permanently end it once and for all. And let me be perfectly clear, instead of delaying, the government needs to introduce a bill to ensure that it never happens. When I ran to become a member of Parliament, Madam Speaker, this was a key plank of my platform. I pledged to do everything that I can to stop the Liberals from ever implementing this dangerous idea. And the sad reality is that the Prime Minister...
I interrupt the honourable member just because there's a lot of noise, and I'm not sure if the noise is coming from people that are, for individuals that may be just in the hall outside here. So I'll ask the Sergeant at Arms to go and check that out. I know that there's people probably filing in, but it is getting a little loud, and we want to make sure that we hear what the honourable member has to contribute here. So the honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And as I said, the sad reality is that the Prime Minister only wants to delay this implementation. And even if the Liberal minister in charge of mental health said last week that her government is not debating if, but when this law should proceed. My answer is never. It should under no circumstances proceed. Instead of being in a position where the Liberals keep introducing legislation to postpone this terrible policy, it will take a new Conservative government to resolve the issue once and for all. And I want to remind all MPs in the House that we could have dealt with this issue not too long ago. It was my Conservative colleague from Abbotsford who introduced a private member's bill that would have stopped this from ever happening. Almost everything we are discussing today would have been dealt with by that bill. And sure enough, the Prime Minister and almost every Liberal MP voted against it. And as for my colleagues who seem unconcerned about the expansion of MAID, let me try to persuade you otherwise. There is no reasonable way to establish a legal framework to identify which mental illnesses are incurable. Every person's different. Every circumstance is unique. There are variables such as someone's economic situation, their support system, and where they live that has an impact. And unfortunately, in rural Canada, access to mental health and addiction services are often abysmal. And if you're fortunate enough to live in a community that does have access to mental health services, there's a good chance that you're going to have a lengthy wait time ahead of you. When someone who makes the very difficult decision to seek help and goes looking for it, I'm often embarrassed to see that in our country it could take days, if not weeks, for them to get that help. And it's understandable that the person with a mental illness who has lost all hope thinks this way, because they cannot access the treatment and support that they need. And we all know someone in our lives who has struggled. We also know that that doesn't define them. And due to the stigma slowly receding, more and more people are finally seeking the help that they need. And the other good news is that mental health research and advances have come a long way in helping treat those with a mental illness. Sometimes it can take years of treatment, even a lifetime's worth. But with the right supports and help, people can regain control of their lives. And I'm raising this because, in accordance with the law, there is a prerequisite that someone suffer from a grievous and incurable medical condition to be eligible for MAID. And on the first part, there's no doubt that people suffering from mental illness are in a grievous condition at times. And if they can't get the help they need, it could quickly get out of control. And on the second part, no wonder why people think their mental illness is incurable. If they can't get access to mental health support, services, and treatments, it must feel like they will never get better. And the Liberals love to talk about compassion, so as I wrap up my comments, Madam Speaker, let me tell you the compassionate thing to do. First, we need to permanently suspend, not delay, MAID for those whose sole underlying condition is mental illness. Second, we need to better our services for those who are most vulnerable in our society. Unfortunately, the Liberal government has yet to deliver on its campaign promise of implementing a mental health transfer for the provinces. And instead of improving access to mental health services, all people are hearing is that the government is making it easier for them to choose death. And finally, we need the Liberals to understand that there is a cost of living crisis. Far too often we have seen them ignore the needs of these struggling Canadians. There's even been instances of people coming forward who say they feel MAID is their only choice because they can't afford to live anymore. In St. Catharines, a man said he wanted to start the process of applying for MAID, not because he wants to die, but because social supports are failing him and he fears he may have no other choice. And the CEO of the Mississauga Food Bank has said people are coming into her facility asking not for food, but for help ending their lives, not because they're sick, but because they can't afford to eat. Madam Speaker, I will proudly continue to fight for the most vulnerable in our society and for common sense. And today that means for calling for the suspension of MAID for those suffering with mental illness. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député